Usually the last molding to be installed in a house is the baseboard. And it runs at the floor, between the wall and the floor. Most of the time, baseboard is going to be a little wider than the casing trim that's run around the door. And a lot of times it's going to have somewhat the same profile on it that the casing trim has. It's always going to be a little bit thinner than the casing trim because it has to die into the casing trim, and you wouldn't want just a flush joint. You want a little bit of an offset joint. Now, we use two different types of baseboard. This again has a profile on it that's pretty similar to our casing trim that we've used. But some other times we will use a two-piece baseboard detail, especially if we want a really tall baseboard that consists of a flat piece with another molding called a panel mold put on top of it. And this is a very nice detail too. This is a very nice detail too. It's a little less ornate, maybe a little less going on. Installing these two can be a little bit different because this is put on in two different pieces. I might be able to get by without coping this baseboard even in a stain grade application because in the inside corners it's just a butt joint in the inside corners. I might maybe undercut one of the pieces a couple degrees to make sure I get a good joint. But this small panel mold, I could almost get by just mitering it in the inside corners because it's such a small joint. But when you come to a bigger molding like this, to try to make a miter joint on the inside corner of a baseboard is pretty tough. Let me say that again. But when it comes to installing a big baseboard like this that has this much profile on it, it's almost impossible to make a miter joint in the corner. Now, if you're painting, you can get pretty close and caulk it, but I think the best thing to do is to cope it. And we talked a lot about coping earlier when we were doing crown mold, and it's the same basic principle. It's actually much easier to cope a piece of baseboard. You just have to make sure that you bevel it under a little bit. One of the problems that we do run into when we're running baseboard, because if you notice the sheetrock never goes all the way down to the floor, and most of the time the bottom edge of the sheetrock is that beveled edge. So what that means is the bottom of the baseboard can tend to tilt in a little bit, and that keeps you from getting a really good joint at the bottom of the baseboard. There's several things you can do to avoid that. One of the things that I'll do is just put a little bit of a nail sticking out in the bottom, and in a minute I'll show you how to do that. But that nail holds the bottom of the baseboard back out and makes a good joint at the bottom. If you have a long wall, something over 16 foot or maybe an over 14 feet, and you have to splice baseboard, I make basically the same joint that I would make on crown mold. It's a good idea to see if you can splice the baseboard on a stud though, but I'm just going to cut it on a 45, and then I'll put some glue in that joint and headless pins, and it may require some sanding and even maybe a little bit of work with some a rasp, or I like to use a product called some bunny planes that is also made by Dave Collins. One of the differences between coping baseboard and crown mold is I can actually cheat a little bit and make part of this cut using my saw. This straight cut right here I can make by turning my piece of baseboard upside down, and now I'm going to pivot this around to where it's undercutting about 4 degrees, so it'll be under beveling, and I'll just cut down to where the profile actually starts. Look real careful and line it up with this Collins coping foot on it. bottom edge of this sheetrock has a taper on it because that's where the mud joint's designed to be made. Also, it doesn't go all the way down to the ground. But what happens, that can allow the bottom of that baseboard to suck back in, and then when my coped piece comes over to meet it, the joint's open at the bottom. So one trick that I learned to do is I can just take a regular drywall nail and put it about 3/4 of an inch up, and I drive it in to where it's sticking out maybe a strong 1/16, maybe a little bit more past the sheetrock. And when I put this piece in place, it holds the bottom that direction, and when I come to make the joint, if I need to, I can always tap on it a little bit and it'll drive that nail in. Now, the same people that make the Cope Master coping machine also make a special screw that can be screwed in after the baseboard's in place, and then you reverse the direction of the screw and it'll suck the board back out. And again, that's a patented screw that the Cope Master people make. Okay. We almost always install baseboard a little bit up off the floor. So what I've done is taken the thick end of a couple of shim shingles and put them under each end of the baseboard. I'm still going to be using a 2.5 inch, in this instance 15 gauge, but you could use a 16 gauge finish nail. I'm going to use a long nail, and I'm going to try and shoot one nail on the top, and then the bottom, I can always hit the bottom plate of the wall, so I don't have to worry quite as much about where there's something to hit. Now, one little trick to remember, if this wall had already been painted, I'd need to try and find the studs, and I'd want to probably find them before I put the baseboard in place. But electric box always gives you a really good clue about where there's a stud, and since most electricians are right-handed, they're going to nail that box on like this, so the box is almost always on the right-hand side of the stud. So the stud's going to be right there. I can just use my tape measure to find the next one. That's a pretty good cope joint. Again, I'm probably not going to put any nail right there because I don't want to take a chance of sucking that back in too far. So I'll just put a nail here and down there. You know, carpentry really is my passion. It's the thing that I enjoy. I think it's something that God has gifted me with. One of the things that really gives me strength to make it through is the fact that I have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, and I know that no matter what is happening to me, God loves me, He cares about me, and He has a great plan for my life. And even when I make a mistake, whether it be a little one or a big one, not just in woodworking, but in life, I know that I've got someone who forgives me and who loves me. I hope to get a chance to meet you personally at one of the seminars or teaching events that I do. Take a picture of some of your work. I'd really love to see it. And again, remember, just keep on going. Don't give up, and you'll end up with some incredible projects.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this material, don't forget to like and subscribe.